I'm sure there will be lots of people watching this video that are like me and that see a hi-fi system with lots of boxes all doing individual things as normal. Whereas I can see more people looking at that and thinking that's only for a crazy person to have all of that in their house just to listen to music. And I think it's for that person where the product I'm speaking about in this video will have huge appeal, because it is a super compact music streaming CD playing integrated amplifier with an MMMC Phonostage, a headphone amplifier and more. And I really do think it is the hi-fi system for the person who really doesn't want a hi-fi system in their home, but they appreciate they need one to get a better quality of listening experience, one that is satisfying. But as we all know, there is a lot of choice in this hi-fi sector, with the competition more fierce than Tyson Fury's third comeback from retirement. But maybe that will not matter to you if the form factor and feature set of the AVM Inspiration CS 2.3 hits your sweet spot, because there are not that many hi-fi integrateds that feature a CD player and MMMC Phonostage with a good amount of amplifier power in this compact size of package. However, it is quite a pricey package, so I have to ask the inevitable value for money question. And the CS 2.3 I have here is AVM's new anniversary edition. And AVM, if you are new to them, are a German high-end hi-fi manufacturer that is celebrating 40 years. And that is no small achievement. And the anniversary edition, I believe, is more of a cosmetic one, with the unit having a bronze faceplate and some bronze at the rear too. And the colour, I'm very unlikely to get perfect for you in this video, so I would describe it to you as being a little more yellow, so maybe it's more of an antique bronze colour. But it's also available in silver, black and chrome if you prefer more bling. And the CS 2.3, it is very compact, and you could probably hold it in one hand without straining too much, but a better size comparison is next to another fairly compact hi-fi amplifier such as the Audiolab 9000A. And you can see the AVM is quite a bit slimmer, so it is impressive to have all of the technology and features in it regardless of anything else. However, design-wise for me, there are some bits I like more than others. I really don't mind the quite understated overall aesthetic that I think perfectly fits the person who doesn't want their hi-fi to dominate their room. And I think the screen used here fits that criteria too, because it is quite small and quite basic by modern hi-fi standards. And any flashing that you're seeing or flickering with the screen, that is only due to my camera. You don't see any of that in real life. Please take note of this. And there are some touch buttons around the screen, but it's not a touch screen. And I know that has become important to some people with products like this. And it's not overly heavy at around 7 kilograms, but it does feel very substantial in your hands. And I think that's due to the casework being very solidly built, and that is great. And the volume control on the front is nice to use, but I found the buttons next to it a bit too small and tricky to press with my fat fingers, and I would have preferred one of them to be a mute button for when I'm changing records and I'm dropping the stylus to prevent the bump sound coming out of the speakers. Round the back, it's more hits, but some misses for me. There is an impressive number of analog and digital ins and outs, including a HDMI ARC, and that will be great for those who use their hi-fi for their TV sound. I was impressed to see 2 sets of analog outputs, a line and a pre-out, meaning you could connect to a larger power amplifier down the line if you wanted to, and also 2 subwoofers if you wanted to. Something I didn't expect to see but ended up liking is the use of load plugs for using the Phonostage. It comes with 3 sets of plugs with typical values of 100, 200 and 1000, and plugging in the correct set for your cartridge is much easier than adjusting dip switches, so I preferred this. But 2 things I'm not the biggest fan of. Firstly, the large aerials for Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. I always think seeing aerials sticking out of a hi-fi product makes it look more old-fashioned. And then the speaker cable terminals are perfectly fine, but I recognise them as being the same as what's used on the Fozzy V3 mono amplifiers that are super affordable. And maybe I'm in the wrong to expect something a little higher quality maybe, or more bespoke at this price of hi-fi. And maybe I am just being grumpy because they are perfectly fine to use. The slot loading CD player is pretty noisy in operation, more so when it's loading and ejecting the disc, not so much when it's playing, and that is important to note. And it does take a bit of time to initially read a disc. It's definitely not the quickest, but it does grab the CD metadata to show you track names, so that is cool, but I did not get any album art. For music streaming, you have AirPlay, Qobuz, Tidal, Spotify, including the Connects, high-res audio, Bluetooth, and it's room ready with internet radio. So that covers a lot of people's needs, but not everyone's. I did pop the hood to take a look inside. And I think the first thing that stands out is that even though this is a compact hi-fi product, there is still a lot of empty space inside. So it is a super compact design, really. The second thing that stood out to me is the use of a DVD-ROM drive that looks to be more of a computer drive, and that would explain the noise it makes, which was definitely a bit louder and squeakier than I expected. It was impressive to see AVM's own branded capacitors being used, because we do not see that very often. And after looking super closely, I could see a lot of impressive circuitry, but I could not locate the DAC chip, which is an ESS Sabre 9038Q2M chip. I had to remove an additional cover to see the amplifier board that AVM told me is Class D, and that it is made for them by an external party, but to their exacting high standards. And for other digital, the CS 2.3 is running AVM's own X-Stream engine, and that means file playback support up to DSD 256, with each unit being, as AVM call it, handcrafted at their facility in Mausch, Germany. And that is another important distinction to a lot of products on the hi-fi market today. I should mention the very high quality metal remote control, because I do much prefer the feel of remote controls like this in my hands compared to more basic plastic ones. However, I didn't love the remote control in operation. Changing volume was always very slow, which is fine when you're at your rough listening volume. However, to change from very low to loud and vice versa takes longer than ideal and is a little frustrating. Also, changing tracks using the remote control felt just a bit more sluggish and sometimes a bit laggy compared to what I was expecting. And I wondered if it was just my CDs being older and less well cared for, or maybe a little bit more difficult to read. Either way, the remote control just felt a bit slow and sluggish, and I would have appreciated a snappier experience. And you can make all the same changes with the touch buttons around the screen, but that was also a little sluggish with CDs. So I ended up using the AVM app to do pretty much everything, as that gave me the best overall experience. And that does tie in with my experience with the screen. I found the text too small to read, sat back at my listening seat a few meters away. I could never see what CD track was playing again because the text was too small, and I could just about see the volume with the bar that slides across, but I didn't know exactly what volume I was set to either. So I didn't find the screen to be of that much use for everyday listening. So instead, I ended up relying pretty much solely on the AVM RCX app to tell me and to do everything. So I'm glad this is a good app in the main that has full integration, so you can change all the CS 2.3 settings, and I like that because it gives you a better overall experience. The app menu system is all pretty self-explanatory, with only a few things that required me to action my brain and think about it. I was able to set everything up and get music playing very quickly with my brain mostly in autopilot mode, as everything felt very familiar and very intuitive, and that is important. And I especially liked the home button because it made getting outs from deeper menus much quicker. So that is a great inclusion. And it was also easy to do things like engage the tone controls if I wanted to use them. And I tested the two different DAC filter modes, smooth and steep. I was not a fan of steep, so used smooth all of the time. And you do have a balance option here, a loudness option, and there are other options for setting a lot of presets and some other things that I didn't really get into. And streaming music from Qobuz was a good experience, but certainly not perfect. The transition from choosing Qobuz to getting to my favourite albums felt a little rudimentary, choosing options from a list and not from flowing graphics like the best apps do, but it was still fine. But browsing my favourites library was very fast, with hardly any noticeable buffering, and I appreciate that, as it always means searching for music keeps up with what I'm doing and just feels easier, and that is important for long-term satisfaction, not frustration. However, there were some things that were missing for me with this app. Firstly, there are no choices for how to organise your music. It is always most recently added first. And I don't mind that, as that would be my choice anyway, but it might not be everyone's choice. Some might prefer alphabetical. I definitely missed the option to search just my favourite albums. I liked having a quick way to move up and down the list, as that is useful, but being able to search for an album specifically in the favourites would be better. With the volume adjustment, I would have preferred a plus and minus button, as sometimes you want to just nudge the volume a slight amount, and yes, using the slider was fast and precise, but it can be fiddly to make very small adjustments, so having a button I think is better, just like what you get when using Qobuz Connect, for example. But the bigger one for me was this app felt more suited to listening to full albums. There was no history of the tracks that have been played or easy way to build an ongoing play queue of individual tracks. I much prefer it when an app builds a playlist from what I've listened to already and allows me to revisit these tracks later, and that does not happen here. So overall, the AVM RCX app is a good one to use. It's just not perfect. I think a couple of changes to the way the system works could give you a better experience, but I like the fact that it is easy to use and always fast, and that is important. Time to talk about the price. The AVM Inspiration CS 2.3 Anniversary Edition, real mouthful. In the UK, its RRP is £5,500. So that is a lot of money for any hi-fi product, but I think it seems like a lot of money for this type of hi-fi product category. So from a value perspective, I think that rests a lot on its sound quality, and given the high price, I had very high expectations. Starting with what I believe will be the most used aspect of the AVM, and that is streamed music. And for me, that meant streamed music from Qobuz and Qobuz Connect. And I just want to say that Qobuz Connect worked fantastically well, really fast, really reliable, and I enjoyed the experience, especially for discovering new music. I like to do that through the Qobuz app. But interestingly, I thought the AVM app sounded slightly better for Qobuz than Qobuz Connect, just slightly. So I used the AVM app for the majority of the review. And listening through my eclectic taste in music, from dub, electronic, some light and fluffy drum and bass, through country, a bit of rock, some jazz and older albums, I would say the CS 2.3 has a solid overall sound quality, meant literally and figuratively. And it really did surprise me with just how punchy and how full and how dynamic and how high quality the bass delivery from it was. It is really full and punchy and surprising in that regard, again for the compact form factor. And it did a great job driving and controlling the larger than average 12-inch woofers in the Revival speakers, with bass that was tight and controlled with very good timing. And this all impressed me, especially as after hours of blasting music, the unit was not even slightly warm to the touch, making it very flexible for where you place it. And I would say the bass was maybe just a touch fat, and I really don't mind that at all, and I definitely prefer it to what I class as or call more of a dry analytical bass that some Class D amplifiers give you. And I think that is great because it will help a lot of modern speakers sound a little bit more substantial, and I think that will be a good thing. For the mid-range and the highs, I would say it was a very clean and clear overall delivery that was definitely more energetic or more lively or more upfront than I was expecting. So this is not a typical, what I call a pipe and slippers over a relaxing kind of system. It's looking to be more exciting and more energetic than that. And I liked the clarity of the vocals. Listening through all sorts of male and female based albums, there is always great clarity to it all, with a lot of detail in the vocals, and I know many will enjoy this. Tonality was good too. It's quite a stereotypical neutral presentation to me, so if you like a warmer, more lush vocal, this is not the one for you. But it doesn't leave you feeling shortchanged for tonality either. The balance is pretty good here. And the treble was very clear and crisp sounding, for better or for worse, depending on the music. And that is why I think the AVM sounds lively and upbeat, because it's not softening or rolling off the top end to make it sound more pleasing. And that is an important distinction for what speakers I think will pair best with it, and I'll speak about that shortly. But I did think that it maybe sounded slightly better with classical music, with jazz music, and maybe music that's just more polished and better well produced, but only by like a small amount. But I did find when the volume was up high, into the mid-60s plus, and this was loud listening, the upper mids and treble did become a little too emphasized for me. And there was definitely some of what I call digital tension in the music that you notice more with some music than others. And the music where you notice it was then a little too attacking for my taste and led me to get listening fatigue more quickly. And this all made me think about the importance of speakers pairing. Because I think the speakers I would recommend to use with the AVM would be ones that have a slightly darker and more laid back tonal character. And a great example of a speaker like that would be Wharfedale's Linton speakers, maybe not so much the Super Linton speakers. But also Wharfedale's Evo 5s are another great example, or maybe the Canton GLE 90S2. And these are just two of the speakers I've had here recently, but there are many others that have a more laid back tonal balance. Because I think they would be a better speakers match than something like a Bowers 700 range, for example, or any speakers that have a more lively upper mid-range and treble region, because then I think you would end up with too much of a good thing. So I hope that helps some people. I was impressed with the soundstage from the CS 2.3. It was again solid, nice and clear and open in the main, with nice width, some depth and some 3D effect at times, and that was great. Being critical, it did not open up the soundstage scale and space as much as from some other similar amplifiers I've had here recently, and I'm thinking of Arcam's SA45, but that is physically much larger and it does not have a CD player, but it does cost a fair bit less. Listening to CDs and comparing their sound to the streamed versions of the same albums, when the mastering is the same, and we know that's not always the case, the sound quality from CDs was very similar. However, I thought they sounded slightly better, actually. There was a touch more fullness, so a slightly warmer tonality, and I preferred that. And there was also slightly better timing and less tension. Still some digital tension, but less, and I preferred that, of course. But the treble was still just a little bit stand out for me with CDs, just a little bit hotter. Maybe it's just hotter than I'm used to, and maybe it stood out a little bit more with CDs for some reason. I'm not sure why, it's just something that I experienced. So even though I thought CDs sounded slightly better, what I said about speakers, pairings, and my suggestions there, that still stays the same. Probably the biggest surprise to me has been the Phonostage sound quality, because some of the negative points I said about the digital sound quality did not carry over. And maybe that shows there is a bit more limitation in the digital section than the amplification, because vinyl sounded very smooth and quite easy going, even with the volume turned up much more, as is often required. And there was much less tension in the music, so I of course enjoyed that, and I enjoyed listening to records. I did think there is potentially a little bit of smoothing over of the music, and that was helping to reduce some record negatives like rumble and crackle, and I didn't mind that at all, because it didn't feel like I was losing anything as an obvious trade-off. So the Phonostage impressed me and sounded much better than I expected. But as we all know, the only way to really assess a hi-fi product is to compare it to one of its peers. But that is really difficult for me because I don't have another hi-fi amplifier here with the same feature set. The closest would have been the Ever Solo Play CD edition, but costing considerably less, it would not have been a fair or useful comparison, and the AVM sounded more powerful and more substantial and better, as you would expect. So that does make it a potential upgrade path for Play owners if you can live without the fancy touchscreen and no Apple Music. So to compare to something that was more on the right level, more apt, I had to put together a multi-box system. And I could have gone a number of different ways with the price level here, but wanted to keep the system as streamlined and as compact as possible, but of course as high performance as possible. So I chose to use the Blue Sound node icon for the music source and DAC, feeding balanced into the Audiolab 9000A integrated amplifier, because the Audiolab on paper has about the same 4 ohm power rating as the AVM. And I listened through all my usual current test songs, all streamed from Qobuz. And this was super interesting because the end music result was very chalk and cheese. The Blue Sound Audiolab pairing sounded noticeably warmer, more relaxed, and much more easygoing, much more kind of set back and relaxed. And that made some music easier to listen to, as you can imagine. It was just very easy, very relaxing to listen to. Actually, a bit more euphonic to listen to. It's quite interesting, actually. And of course, that makes some music just more pleasing, right? Definitely some music, and definitely some music that is less well produced, a bit maybe rougher in the high frequencies. This system softened that off, again, making that music sound more pleasing. But when it came to the bass, the 9000A was not as tight and controlled as the AVM, and not as punchy either. It was close, but not as good. The bass was a bit thicker and less well defined. Also, the specificity of the music was worse, and the attack and immediacy and energy of the music was noticeably less. So the Audiolab Blue Sound combo was the more relaxing listen, but less exciting, but also less fatiguing. But I did find myself looking for more from it in terms of energy to try and match the AVM. And that meant I kept turning the volume up, looking for it, looking for a little more fun, and it didn't quite ever get me to the same level. So my conclusion from this comparison listening was that both of these systems I think are around the same kind of quality. They're just very different. And if you really like one presentation, you might dislike the other because they are so chalk and cheese. So if we think the one box, very compact system is holding its own with the two box, very highly regarded system, well, then there is a lot of praise in that. However, the two-box system does cost considerably less. But if we wanted to match the feature set of the AVM with an all Audiolab system, all 9000A, we would need the A, we would need the N and the CDT. And that would cost £5,500. That would be the same. So that's really interesting. But we can build hi-fi systems in so many different ways, and it would be possible to put a system together to match the features of the AVM for less money. So this makes for a very tricky conclusion, because I do think the AVM will be a solid offering for anyone looking for the most discreet, highly featured hi-fi system they can find. Again, it's ideal for someone who doesn't want an obvious hi-fi system in their home, but they still want a better music listening experience. And maybe that is worth the premium to that person to have it all in the one compact unit. And it's definitely perfect for an existing big AVM system owner who wants something smaller for another room in their home, still with the same user experience. Of course, it's perfect for that person. But trying to look at it from every angle, I think if you are a separate audiophile, someone who's happy to have multiple boxes as part of their system, I think it's in the way that you can put those components together and to give you the end result you're looking for. It could make a product like the CS 2.3 look very expensive. And that is something to take away if you are someone who doesn't really need the compact all-in-one form factor. So I hope this review has been helpful, hope it's been useful, hope you have enjoyed it. If you did, smash the thumbs up button and of course subscribe to the channel to see more.